Literatura Obscura, first episode. My name is Michael Kilman. I am an author and an anthropologist, and I just freaking love books.
My name is Athena. Don't worry about the last name, because I'm gonna have people asking about it for like 10 years in the comments if I just say it out loud. Um, and I am an ex-bartender, just kind of a dilettante right now.
She's
And
a nerd.
yeah, yeah, and I like books.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
But she's even got her Trekkie love shirt on
I
here right
do.
here,
I've
right?
got
So
my Darmok and Gelada Tanagra
right,
shirt.
right. So
So
that's how you can pick them out for sure, right? But for our very first episode, for a podcast that explores strange and unusual and obscure texts, we picked, or rather Athena picked, The House of Leaves.
which I love this book. I love this book. I yeah. And actually, the idea kind of came about because we just started talking about House of Leaves. I think
Well, we were talking about strange fiction. You were talking about Russian literature in
yes,
particular, which
yeah,
is one of your kind of like
yes,
loves, right?
yes, yeah,
So there probably will be some Russian literature in the future.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but then we started, because obviously Matt and I are on the other podcast, Resistance Reads, and we were all kind of hanging out at a party, and Athena, brought up this book, and I was like, that book sounds really interesting. I mean, she didn't tell me too much because she said it would ruin it, and I think she was right. So, with all that said, I think we're going to try and do a sort of summary, but this one is one of those books that a summary is a little tough because you have four different narrators, and as you said before we got on here, three of them are completely unreliable.
Completely,
So,
completely. And at least one of the unreliable narrators flat out admits that he is an unreliable narrator
and gives you like two endings.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah. So gosh. Okay. So I guess if you really want the full experience, turn away now and come back to the recording later.
Right.
Because going in completely blind is it's rare that I think that's helpful to reading a book. It's like there's not a lot of books, not a lot of movies where I'm like, oh, you should go in totally blind. That's rare.
Yeah.
This is one where it actually can be helpful.
And I did. I took your advice and went in totally blind. I didn't look up. I didn't even read the book summary because you just have to have the experience. Because part of reading this is the experience.
Yeah.
That's a big part of what this book is.
Yeah, literally physical experience.
Physical experience. Like I gotta, we got pages that are like, you've got weird squares and rotate them around.
Yeah.
There was one that I was like, oh, clearly these words are backwards, so you had to like use kind of a mirror because they're upside down and backwards. You have crossed out stuff. You have like, pages with like two lines and all kinds of things, right? I mean, Braille, there's Braille, there was musical notes for one part. Like literally this, corners and stuff, or there was one page towards the end where like you had to like read it upside down and going up, like totally the opposite of Western. It was like instead of the typical right to left, it was like left to right, reading upside down to the top.
There's another one towards the end where like you have to like read part of one page, skip ahead, and read like from there up and then go back again, and like it's just like it's physically engaging in a way that reading usually isn't.
Literally physically.
But that said, I guess it is certainly a horror novel. Essentially the framework, I guess, because I feel like a summary is almost impossible. But the framework is that there is this young man who is an apprentice at a tattoo shop. Probably a stretch to even say he's an apprentice tattoo artist at that point, but he's an apprentice at a tattoo shop in LA, living a pretty dissolute life, and comes across a manuscript in the house. Like, so a neighbor of his friend passes away, and they find this manuscript in like a bazillion pieces in amongst his things after he dies. And so he takes this big trunk and like takes it back to his house and starts trying to put this narrative together. And the narrative is about a documentary about a house that contains impossible spaces. And the thing is, getting into this whole unreliable, but also maybe it's a different reality, who knows kind of thing. None of what happens in this documentary, none of what is outlined in this deceased old man's writings can be substantiated whatsoever. So so
So it's like
it's a lot.
it's about a fake documentary that's in a essentially a fake faux academic book, because there's footnotes all over this thing, and sometimes
that make no sense.
that make no sense. Sometimes the footnotes are like the narrator, the guy, the tattoo artist, Johnny, sometimes it's him like explaining his life story and the things that are happening around putting this book and all these notes and everything together. And then there's passages where he like accidentally destroyed them or misplaced them, and so he has to explain that to you. And there's passages where Zapano, which is the guy who, this crazy old man who had this big trunk of stuff all assembled for his like life's work or whatever, he had blacked out some of those things. So it gets, and then the documentary film's called The Navidson Record, about this very strange, like on the outside the house appears fine.
Yeah, it's a completely normal, like older house in Virginia. And then on the inside, like I said, it contains impossible spaces. It starts off with just a hallway, or I guess maybe a closet might be more appropriate at first. That's too long. It's just too long. It shouldn't fit in the house. And everything just really snowballs from there.
Really? Things escalate quickly.
Yeah. Things spiral from there.
So you'll get it soon.
You'll get it. It makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah, and so Johnny Truant, the ostensible collector of this story, he actually flat out admits he's not a reliable narrator. He says that at several points, that like, I changed that, or I just made that up, or but then there's other things that seem too believable for the character to just be made up. So it's like, okay, so some of this is real, but how much, and where does, what parts of this is he making up? And like, it's so hard to tell. And then Zampano, like, he's this crazy old blind man who, like, nobody's even entirely sure how he died. And also there's hints that, like, maybe something was in the apartment with him with the claw marks. It's like,
yeah,
oh wait, so there's actually maybe
marks.
A monster.
Right, maybe, yeah.
But it's never clear. Like, and yeah, so you've got, for your unreliable narrators, you've got Johnny Truant, big time. Zampano, who is like writing about something that may or may not have ever happened in some reality somewhere. And then, of course, Navidson and his folk, but primarily him, because he's while a photojournalist, who they do tend to try to represent reality, also visual media are inherently, I mean, it literally depends on where you stand. So it's like,
yeah, and not only that, and I think there's a current of trauma kind of running through all the unreliable narrators.
Oh god, yeah.
I mean, so you have Navidson. So he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist because he took this photo of this like dying girl, like she's literally dying from a famine.
Based on a real photo.
Based
I'm sure
on
you've seen that.
Yeah, right.
Obviously, so it's a little girl in Somalia dying of starvation with a vulture near her. There is a real photo that inspired this in the book, which also then kind of calls into question, like, did this photo ever really exist, or was are we basing it off of the thing that we know exists? You know,
Right, right, right.
but yeah, so that's like a driving moment in his life. He's also a Vietnam vet.
He's a Vietnam vet, so he's got a lot of trauma, and it talks about how he likes to kind of get out in the world himself, and that's when he does his best work. Even as a soldier, he did his best work by himself, and so he's like obsessed with his work, and obsession is kind of another huge theme in this book, right?
Yeah.
All three unreliable narrators are obsessed with their chunk of the story.
Yeah.
But there is a reliable narrator too.
Bless the editors.
Bless the editors, right? Which is just every once in a while you see a footnote and it's like the editor's explaining something. Like Mr. Truant gave no explanation for why he put this in here even though he admits it's fake. Or we translated this weird passage that was in like Latin or ancient Greek for you and here it is. Or
this is missing, or we attempted to verify this, it couldn't. And
right.
It's like, and the editors, I mean, of course, it's still the actual author, but the editors, you can just, I kind of love the editor, like, inserts, because all I can imagine is, like, some people in offices in New York just being like, oh my God, you know, like,
yeah. As they would be with probably any experimental fiction in general.
Yeah.
And you just kind of wonder, like, what was it like for the publisher for this, the actual publishers, the real world publishers of this book? Because it is a beast, and in like.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's not a small book.
Mm-mm.
It's a whole lot of book.
It's 709, I think, pages. Now, granted, you know, some of these pages have
are nearly blank, but
some of them have one word or sometimes a single letter, or.
But you're still having to hold everything in your mind through all of those pages, like, and it's like okay, like, and even though I've read this at this point 3 or 4 times, something like that, there are still times when I'm reading it where I have to like be like, wait, flip back, like, you know, check, you know, and especially like during that stretch about 2/3 through where like what the footnotes are referring to aren't there. So you'll have footnotes and you like there's no reference because it's like part of missing text. And you're like, oh God.
Yeah. There's a couple of pages when it's like, there's a footnote number and there's no footnote, or there's a footnote and there's no footnote number, or sometimes the footnote refers back to a page like 70 pages ago and you're like, what was that again?
It's like, okay, hang on.
So it's like reading this book is an endurance marathon. I mean, it is just like...
Yeah, it literally requires physical effort that you don't usually get with most books.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that said, I genuinely think it's worth it. You know, because it's...
I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. And
it's super unique.
It's incredibly unique. I don't think I've ever even heard of a book quite like this.
No.
There's... I guess some that are similar.
But I didn't look too far into those. But it certainly it does certainly kind of lend to kind of almost a postmodernist kind of feel. But we'll get into that later. But back to the kind of main summary. So you kind of have a little architecture for how this book works. But there's actually 2 simultaneous storylines. Yeah. So the first one is the documentary. Yeah. The actual documentary you're going through and you're meeting this guy and his family and their encounters with the house. And the other is Johnny Truant's life as he's putting it together, which Johnny Truant is like, I mean, Johnny Truant is such a great name because he's very obviously like, he's a tattoo artist. He's super into drugs. He has a good friend named Lude, and they just like to go pick up women and, you know, get drunk and do drugs. And they're having these crazy adventures all over LA. And
unsurprisingly, early on, you guess he's running from something. It's like, you don't behave like that unless you're trying to numb some things, buddy. Like,
right.
You know, but it's not presented in a way that's eye-rolly. You know, it works. It's like, I've known people like that. You know what I mean? It's like...
Well, and it's a good contrast because these narratives are interspersed. And so the one thing that was cool is like as Johnny is going through something similar happens with the house and the documentary. And so in a way it gives you kind of a companion story and you're kind of bouncing back and forth. Although say sometimes they'll be like in the middle of like this major moment in the thing and then there's this long footnote. I'm like, do I read the footnote that's like 6 pages by Johnny Truant,
which one do I do first?
Do I read the story about the house? So you're kind of having to play this little assembly game. It's like a puzzle almost to put together.
Yeah, absolutely. And underneath it, you are getting Zampano's story in some ways,
right?
But that is left so just hinted at. It's really interesting.
It's it's obscure.
There are it is. There are hints later on in the book, especially of him having undergone some really terrible loss.
Yeah.
Like possibly children. And it's just hinted at.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like both of the people kind of documenting the Navidson record are both people who are kind of trying to wall away something from their past.
Yeah, some terrible grief and loss and trauma.
Yeah, some grief, some loss, some fear. There's something that they're both trying to push back. And Zampano does it by like hiding out in his apartment and sealing up the windows and focusing on this book for
who knows how many years. Yeah, years for sure.
Yeah, there's hints later in the book that he's been working on, weird shit. If not the Navidson record, like that apparently was finally what focused him, if it exists, in some reality. But he, like, there's, like, things, like, from the 50s, him, like, writing that letter to the editor about, like, oh, these guns can't actually be from World War II, and this dealer is, like, advertising falsely, and it's like it's showing hints of an obsession that early, or an obsessive personality.
Right.
I guess that early.
And he has his own slew of women around.
Yes.
Which
his readers.
His readers and his assistants, but there's hints that maybe he's kind of like Johnny in the way that, there was some other things going on.
Yeah, he was too old, too blind, and too poor for them to necessarily be interested in that way, but he got their company, and you could tell that, like, their company, him knowing he had the focus of a pretty young woman was obviously something he wanted.
For sure.
Even if he couldn't see her, even if they didn't really physically touch, like, he's like, okay, I am the focus of this attractive, intelligent young woman. And
right.
Yeah, they, like, and probably did serve the same sort of emotional narcotic effect that it did, for Johnny, yeah.
Yeah. So let's first do Johnny's story, and then we'll go through a summary of Johnny's story, and then we'll go through a summary of the house.
Okay.
And the actual Navidson record. So let's start with Johnny. So he finds the trunk, starts assembling it.
Yep. And just in the process of putting the story together, the story, as it seems to with its original compiler, theoretically, provided we can trust anyone's versions of anything, with Zampano, like it seems to start leaking into his psyche and his life. His perceptions of reality start becoming distorted. He starts having, maybe they're hallucinations, maybe they're not. Like, again, the way it's presented is so compelling because it's like, is he just straight up going crazy? Like, when he has these panic attacks, when he has these hallucinations, these, bouts of paranoia, is that just his mind slipping, or is there something else happening? And the further he gets into the narrative, the further he gets into all of these notes and trying to sort out what's going on and trying to translate all of these things in languages he doesn't necessarily speak, although it turns out he speaks some of them. He degrades further and further. Things get worse and worse for him in a pretty grisly way, truthfully.
Yeah.
His health deteriorates. He loses most of what little friendships he had. Although, like, for all that Lude is a generally fucked up character, he does seem to actually care about Johnny.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, because there's that scene at one point about halfway through the book where Lude comes in and he realizes, because Lude kind of thinks that he's on smack, and that he's like, become basically a junkie because like he loses his job at the tattoo parlor. He's losing weight. He looks terrible. So Lude comes in and investigates, and he realizes it's his obsession with this book. And Lude is like walking out the door, and then he like strikes a match and turns around and hands it to Johnny.
Yeah, or it's not a match, it's a Zippo. He gives him a Zippo.
That's right, that's right. The matches are later.
Yeah, the matches are later. But yeah, he gives him a Zippo, like, dude, just get rid of it.
Like, burn it.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, he doesn't say it directly, but Johnny definitely gets the hint.
Yeah.
Like, he wants him to destroy this thing because he sees it's destroying. He's obsessed with this one stripper he calls lovingly Thumper.
Yeah.
Who comes in and gets tattoo work done. And she, I mean, she kind of keeping her distance for most of the time.
Yeah.
But then he has a series of like all kinds of like sexual relationships with different women. There was this one really interesting, I thought it was such a telling thing that he does, the author. Like, so he goes and Lude's lists of sexual conquests, and he goes through this whole list of sexual conquests. And then Johnny turns around a couple pages later after you go through this list, and you're kind of like, ew, this is, this seems really, shitty and whatever. And then he lists all the different ways that these women were abused to make them behave that way. And it was kind of like turning a light on himself, saying, look, no one behaves this way because they're a happy person.
Yeah, and which also casts both him and Lude's behavior in a certain light. It's like, it's not him and Lude being exploitative. It's just them being broken people finding other broken people.
Yep.
Over and over. And it's a lot of broken people in the book.
Well... Yes, I mean, and like he picked the right the setting for that. L.A. is a place full of broken people and broken dreams, right? So it's really well known for that. I mean, a lot of major cities are like that, but so there's that kind of stuff going on, and he's just continually assembling it, and eventually he gets fired from his tattoo job, and he ends up just kind of like there's this one scene where he's just like sitting there and he hasn't like washed in a while, and there's like eviction notices piling up outside the door. Meanwhile, he's like scrolling away, writing notes and putting all his thoughts into the record.
Like he doesn't have any electricity. He doesn't. He has a phone for a while, because this was, of course, still back when landlines were more common than cell phones. And
late 90s, this is taking place.
And so truthfully, I can vouch for this being an old. They would often leave phone service on for a really long time. Like, you would sometimes find abandoned houses that had functioning phone service. This is absolute truth. Like, and so it's like it's one of those like oddly awesome little details where it's like his power's off, he's getting eviction notices, but he still has a phone until almost when he leaves. And he's not bathing, he's not eating, he's like, he's selling he's selling blood for candles because he can't afford, a power bill. He is really his life, again, spirals. And it's interesting because, with that, there are two literal shapes that are presented through the book. Described and also sometimes essentially presented in the way the type is set, and that's mazes and spirals. And those are both just a recurring theme, and that's why we were laughing about me saying is he spiral, everything does really fucking spiral,
and as he's spiraling, there's a parallel in with the house too, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And then he ultimately gets kicked out. He has this old letter that he sells for a lot of money, right? It's like this actually historical piece that Zampano had, and he sells it to a pawn shop, and that's kind of how he...
Yeah, well, no, he said the letter is one that he sent to his mother, but it's the locket it's in.
Oh, the locket.
The locket. The locket is gold and platinum and jewels and stuff. And he kept it for many years because it was his mother's, but part of his breakdown is kind of just, I don't know, not coming to terms with his past, but going through something with his past regarding
Yeah.
his mother. Really, a lot of grief, a lot of anger develops. That was probably already there,
Yeah.
but it bubbles up.
Well, and he finally does at some point. I forget exactly when, but he tells you in pieces his past and everything he's been through, and his mother like attempts to kill him because
Yeah.
his father dies and his mother loses his mind, so she strangles him or whatever.
Yeah.
Then
Or maybe she didn't.
or maybe she didn't.
She said she does in her letters,
Yeah,
but he
it gets
also
confusing,
contradicts
yeah,
that
yeah.
narrative. He says, "Oh, she tried to strangle me." Wait, no, she actually didn't. She just said that.
Mm-hmm.
Now we don't know which of these versions is correct.
True.
Either one could be.
True.
But yeah, either way, she was severely mentally ill because we had the editors, you know, the fictive editors, put her actual letters that they were able to find into the book, and as a result, you know that she did exist and she had serious, you know, mental illness.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we're not really sure.
Yeah.
You know, because did she strangle him? She might have.
Mm-hmm.
She was certainly mentally ill enough to try that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, she might have also just been saying that.
Yeah.
Because again, severely mentally ill, like her version of reality. And then as, you know, Johnny Truant is slip sliding down his own stairway, you know, like what does he remember of what does one mentally ill person remember about another mentally ill person's behavior or thoughts or motivations? You know, it's like it's.
But he does end up in a series of foster homes, and
yes.
There's this one big military dude who like after he's behaving badly and is picking fights at school, takes him out to the field, and he's like, "Where are we going?" And the stepfather's like, "We're going to the hospital," and then proceeds to like beat him
the crap out of him
within an inch of his life, kind of thing. And so and then after that, he kind of like changes his approach to the world. And I mean, obviously, he's really traumatized at this point.
Yeah.
But then he ends up finally kind of he kind of ends up on the road as kind of like he's kind of wandering around and
he eventually puts the manuscript into storage. Although at some point he must put it on the internet. He never does say when.
He doesn't say when he puts it on the internet, but while he's on the road, he's at a show at a bar, and these band members have a reference to the 5.5 minute hallway, which is like a key part of the documentary in the Navison record. And he goes up afterwards and he asks them, "Where did you hear that?" And then they tell him about the Navison record, and they tell him about this book they found online that someone had assembled, and apparently it's like going viral on the internet. And so he's kind of like, the thing that I've been assembling went viral all over the internet, and now there's all these new people to obsess over it as well.
Yeah. And kind of wonders, like, what have I done letting it loose?
Yeah.
Because, again, it seems to devour people in a way. Like, it pulls them in. It creates obsessions. It catches people.
Right.
You know, that it's like the story is in and of itself a labyrinth. You may get a couple of turns in, and then
then it traps you.
Yeah,
and
you are.
You don't know where to go anymore.
Yeah.
And then his friend Lude dies.
Yeah.
And so he's like dealing with that grief, and he gives you like these two different stories, and one is like where he like murders the killer and does all this stuff, and then you're like,
and then it turns out that he just thought about that, and like, you know, because that's one of those places where it's like, okay, the presence of the editors tells me that if like they strongly suspected he was involved in a murder, like they'd mentioned something about that,
right?
You know? But now it's just him like having violent revenge fantasies for a minute and then snapping out of it and then just wandering off again, because like at this point he's pretty lost, and we never do find, I mean, nobody knows what eventually happens to him.
No, because there's actually a note about one of the girls who comes over to the apartment they like sleep together, and then he apparently wakes up in the middle of the night screaming and scares her so bad that she runs out of the house because she's having like terrible nightmares after starting to dissect this book. And then there's like a footnote from the editors from an online forum about how like I wonder where Johnny went. He was a really nice guy. I just got kind of spooked. Like, I'm sorry, this, no one knows what happened to him.
Yeah,
And
and the editors say that like they can't find him anymore.
right.
Like,
He's just vanished.
yeah.
Because he very clearly was at some point, and they don't tell you when, again, like with the internet, at some point he was very clearly collaborating with the editors because the editors note that they were in conversation with him
Yeah.
for a second edition. Because the first edition kind of just gets published after being found online.
Yeah.
And then the second edition. So he just kind of disappears.
Yeah.
And we don't really know what happened to him. And he ends the book with a story about a woman whose child is born not quite a stillbirth, but pretty damn close, and it's on life support, and then ultimately the woman talks about unplugging and lets the baby go.
Yeah, after and it's really interesting because leading up to that, there's that whole like watching the hospital and like people who have heard about her absolute focus on this child who will not live. All of a sudden people start like thinking that there's going to be some sort of miracle, right? Like it turns into like
even the doctor is like, the baby's still going, I can't believe it.
Yeah, even though it's just the machines, and then the mom, like, she wasn't working a miracle, she was just processing her grief and saying goodbye, and then she's able to allow that to happen, and it's just like, yeah, it's an interesting, because the way it's written for a minute, you think it's going to turn into like like a Marian apparition story, like
right.
But then no, it ends the way it actually would, and
the baby just dies.
Yeah,
and that's the end. But I think that also parallels that like here he nursed this child into the world, the book, and then he just let it go, and then that's kind of the end. And then the end of the book, like there's a lot of footnotes and appendices, but where the book actually ends is with the house story, which I think we should dive into that real quick too.
Yeah, the house, which is ultimately the center.
The center, and honestly, it was like there were scenes in the house thing that were so compelling that I really felt like I was watching a documentary. I mean, It was just like
it's really well written.
It's really extremely well written and super compelling. But yeah, so
the house. So Will Navidson, like we were talking about, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist. He and his partner, they are not married at the beginning of this whole story. They've been together for years. They have 2 children together. They've had their ups and downs, but they've stuck with each other, and they buy a house in Virginia because as a photojournalist, he has spent a lot of their relationship traveling, and Karen, his partner, she has her own issues, absolutely. But you can also understand, like, why she was like, hey, like, I'm sick of you constantly being gone. So it's like, they're both flawed but likable characters. They really are. It's like, he can be obsessive, she can be distant, whatever. They're trying. And so they buy this house in Virginia. And
with their 2 kids.
And the kids love it. It's got a big yard, like, like, awesome, we're gonna settle down, we're gonna have like an actual family life, like no more of this being gone for months and months on end, like, and starts off fine, and then they discover the 5.5-minute hallway. So there's the longer film that eventually develops, but the first film, in theory, is the 5.5-minute hallway, which is this hallway, extremely large closet, whatever, that is pitch black and far too long for the house. Like it should not fit inside the house. Um, and Nabbitson, being a photojournalist, of course, he's documenting this. Like he's filming this. He's making sure this all gets recorded. Because I mean, that's just who he is. Like it's not that none of that is even remotely surprising. It's like, okay.
Well, and he got a grant. Like this was like his excuse to be home. He was gonna like document on film his family,
just
and
living
life,
at home.
and living at home, and what it's like to just like be an American family. And so he sets up cameras all over the house. And all this, motion activated cameras and stuff, which come in a lot of handy very soon.
but he also, when they discover this hallway, they're like, there's no way. And so they spend a fair bit of time trying to prove that this can't be what it appears to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, it is a family suddenly confronted with the impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Like the impossible, the incomprehensible. So, he gets a hold of his friend and his brother and like gets people to help him try to measure this and like figure out what is happening. And it defies everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the initial short film is basically just, shots of this hallway, shots of the outside of the house, and then shots of some measurements, right? Mm-hmm. Basically the first glimpse of we are looking at something very much outside of the normal human experience.
Mm-hmm. Something that should not exist.
Yeah, it is. It makes no sense. It cannot. Whatever tools we have to measure these things aren't working. And this is where it all starts to get bad fast. It really does.
Yeah.
And then, I guess.
So he goes down at one point, goes down the hallway.
He goes a little ways down.
A little ways down and realizes there's another hallway.
Yeah.
And, I forget if like he comes out right away.
He's in there for, I think it's about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, not for super long. Enough that his partner starts to get worried.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to explore it, but she's not real happy about the idea, which I understand. You don't want your loved one just going somewhere.
Yeah. Some unknown impossible place that, by the way, is like ashen.
Pitch
the
black.
Walls it's pitch black. The walls are like this ashen gray color.
Yeah.
And it is like cold enough that at one point later one of the characters gets frostbite.
Yeah.
So it is a strange, dark, and cold place.
Yeah. That shouldn't exist.
And I think it's on that first thing he hears
the growl.
The growl.
Yeah.
Some sort of growl inside.
Which they don't know if it's things shifting,
Mm-hmm.
because the space does turn out to shift.
Mm-hmm.
Even in their first ventures into it, they see signs of it changing as you go. Or could it be something in there? And that's not clear. It's never clear.
It's never clear. There's a couple of moments when you're like, wait, there is a monster. There has to be a monster.
Yeah.
And then you're like,
maybe not.
Maybe not.
I don't know.
Which is what I think makes it so damn compelling too. Yeah. Like you're like, what? What is there? Is there? No. You're like, you turn in the next page, like, come on, tell me. So, it's not like a modern American horror where like not only do you think there might be a monster, but you get a full shot of that monster. It's
never completely answered.
It's never completely answered.
Yeah, there's no. Yeah, you genuinely don't get a real answer. Yeah. I'm inclined to think there is
something.
Yeah,
me too.
But I think it also might be part and parcel of the place.
Yeah, it might be. But so then he comes back and his spouse is pissed. She's like, how dare you go down there? And they, his brother actually puts a bunch of locks on the door, and they have like different colored keys. There's 4 different locks and keys to lock up. They build a door onto the hallway because the other thing is they're afraid the kids might wander in there as well.
Yeah, there are 2 small children.
There's 2 small children. So and then he ends up hiring like these this team of 3 explorers to go in there because
Yeah.
his wife, not wife, spouse, she refuses to let him go in there and explore. And
Yeah.
she, you know, I think she's just very much like, this is just like what you always do. And
Yeah, she
you know,
doesn't want him disappearing again. Plus, she does genuinely love him, and she's terrified.
Yeah.
Understandably.
Right. This sudden strange passageway is opened, and it, you know, when he goes in there and sees, like, it looks like it goes on for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So he hires these explorers. Like, there are people who, like, have trekked Everest and all kinds of crazy things.
There's one where even early on you're like, this guy makes me nervous.
Yeah, Holloway is his name. He's like big, butchy.
He's a little too
strong
alpha male.
Alpha male.
To be reliable.
Right.
Like alpha male in the pejorative sense. Like, he's definitely very, like...
He's a meathead.
Me strong hunter, rawr.
Yeah, rawr.
And you're like, oh no, this could go bad.
Yeah, and right away, he obviously likes Navinson's wife.
He also wants to, like, argue with Navinson. He wants to be the guy in charge.
Right.
And, like, and the other 2 guys are just, like, smart, easygoing outdoorsmen who are like, okay, yeah, we can do this, you know? And then Holloway is just, like, talking about, like, conquering and blah, blah, blah. And, like, you're just like, oh, God, buddy, I don't know how this is going to go. Spoiler, it doesn't go well.
It does not go well.
It does not go well. It goes very badly.
Right. So they go down, and pretty much right away they find a spiral staircase. And
a massive spiral
staircase.
They
start going down the damn thing, and they're gone for like 5 days.
Yeah.
And they're out of radio contact because the radios don't seem to really reach that far of range. So after about a day's march in, they basically disappear. They go and then they come back. And then they come back, they pack a whole bunch of supplies up, and they go again with the intention of finally finding the bottom of the staircase.
Yeah.
And you kind of get the sense that Navinson himself is really kind of jealous of the whole thing.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And you can understand why he feels the way he does. You can also understand why Karen is like, absolutely fucking not, are you crazy? Like,
yeah.
It's one of those things where the emotional reactions of the characters involved are all pretty understandable, truthfully.
No one is really unreasonable in any of this.
No. They're all pretty believable characters, truthfully.
Yeah. Like, they're really well written.
They're doing what people like that do.
Yeah. So then they go down, and then they disappear. They just totally disappear.
Yeah.
And then there's this strange event. They're gone for like 10 days or something like that. Something crazy.
So, yeah, they're gone for a while.
Like enough where because they bought like a week or 2 of supplies or something, and by now they're definitely running out because there's no water. Like the labyrinth just goes on and on and on. Like there's no like doors just lead to other doors and so on and so forth. But they do reach they find out later they do reach the bottom of the spiral staircase. But then they hear this kind of like pounding on the wall in the normal house.
Yeah, they hear Morse code actually.
Yeah, Morse code. Yeah, SOS.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. It was SOS.
Yep.
And so so Will is like, I gotta go rescue him, and him and his brother, and then this other guy. Who's the other guy? Their friend. He's in a wheelchair. Rustin. Yeah, Rustin. They're in a wheelchair, and so they go, and they go down into it despite Karen's like protests. He's like, well, what are you supposed to do?
She mans the base camp inside the
normal house.
And then his brother is like at the next camp inside the labyrinth. And then Navinson and Rustin are the ones that go down the staircase.
But the staircase they get down in 5 minutes.
Yeah, because distances are not set,
and the distances keep changing. Yeah. Right, so they go down and they head down, and at the same time Holloway goes berserk.
Yeah,
like absolutely berserk. Like he starts running around like crazy, and then he ends up
he's focused on like finding what's making the growl.
The monster. Monster.
He's convinced it's real. They're gonna find it.
He's gonna conquer it.
Yeah, and then when the other 2 guys don't go along with it, he like starts getting paranoid and hostile and like.
Well, he runs off, and then he like I somehow the house like redirects him back, I think, and then he ends up shooting one of them because he thinks at
Yeah.
first he's the monster, and then the other guy is like, "You shot him," and he's like, "We got to get him help," and Holloway's like, "There's no turning back
And
now."
he just wanders off into the maze.
Well, then he shoots him.
Yeah, well, he wanders off, disappears, comes back after Navidson and Reston find the two guys who have like found a room to try to halfway hide in, and comes back at that point and
Kills
kills one of them, and then disappears again. And it eventually turns out he turned the gun on himself. Which
Right.
Unsurprising.
Right.
All things considered.
Right. And the reason you know all this is because they all carry cameras with them. And then for whatever reason, the tapes like mysteriously like appear up in the house sometimes, or they like find them in a hallway with nothing else around, or like somehow all the story keeps getting back to them.
Well, and the interesting thing is like when they talk about how nothing lasts in the corridors, and that's the thing is there may be lost tapes. We don't know that we're just in there too long and got eaten by the labyrinth.
Mm-hmm. The Minotaur, maybe.
But did you notice that like the organic stuff disappeared first?
Yeah. All organic stuff starts disappearing. They leave these little markers. They have string to try to help themselves find themselves back. These really, really long twine,
fishing
line and stuff to help them find their way back and stuff. But like over time, all that stuff degrades.
Everything eventually disappears.
It just disappears.
Yeah.
They have these
like
little
food
neon
and water
markers.
Goes first.
Yeah,
food and water. Like anything organic seems to go first, but eventually everything disappears.
And the neon markers are like scratched. They look like they have scratch marks on them.
It's there are bits that are genuinely really fucking creepy.
Yeah, no, I don't get creeped out by much, but there was a couple of pages in this book that actually creeped me out because I've read a lot of horror, and I was like, whoa,
well,
I gotta not read
one
this at night.
really like just I still think it's creepy as hell is when after Navidson and Reston find the two non-deranged and violent guys from the other expedition, and they're bringing back the body of one and trying to save the other, when Tom sends down the lift and everything, and
Tom stays at the top of the spiral staircase because he refuses to go down.
Yeah,
he's like, no.
Which turns out to be us because they're like, you should come down. And he was like, no, I shouldn't. And then he does the smart thing, which is to send down a lift.
A lift.
To get the injured and less mobile people up. And it worked, worked great. Except as they're going up, well, as Reston is going up, all of a sudden it starts going faster and faster and faster. The pulley just starts screaming through, and it's because the staircase has decided to get bigger. And all of a sudden, Navidson is at the bottom of who knows how deep a pit.
Well, they calculate it. It's like 15 or 16 miles or something like that. They calculate it. They calculate it based on like the sound of the thing dropping. He drops a quarter or something like that.
And it ends up being like something absolutely insane, like greater than the diameter of the Earth.
Yeah, something totally crazy.
This is not a possible space on this planet.
Right. You will never. Navinson's now down there at the bottom of the staircase with no way back.
Yeah. Yeah, like in theory, he might make it back in like 700 years or something crazy like that. And it's like, because again, the spaces change. They all change. They and it may be in relationship to people's mental state, but
there's discussions of that.
Yeah, but that's never clear. That's never clear.
It said, and they talked about like, is there a monster? Maybe there's a monster when people need there to be a monster, and then like they talk about the spiral staircase as like when the first group of adventurers got to the bottom, and were able to let them know that there was in fact a bottom, then people knew it was a bottom. So then when the rescue party comes, then it's easy for them to go to the bottom because they were expecting a bottom.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of sense.
But then why does it expand when they're going back up?
Why does it expand?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when you kind of realize, no, it just has its own rules, and it's not going to tell us what these are.
Right.
Like, yeah, and yeah, I guess like that's kind of the thing that makes it so entertaining for me as a book in general is just that whole thing of that slippery hold on reality,
Mm-hmm.
which I think some of the best horror comes from that.
Right.
From like, oh, the things I thought I knew, the things that were certain, the things that make me safe. I don't have a grip on those in
Yeah.
this. This
No,
is
there's nothing to hold on to, and
yeah.
that's really so. Then after that, there's kind of like everyone thinks he's dead, like Will is dead, because now it's been like a week past of when he should have like had food and water, and then like Karen's like in despair, and then she's like about to give up. And he just like walks into the regular house and collapses.
Yeah.
And then they all kind of are going to get ready to leave because Karen, by the whole backstory with Karen is she's like leaving the house. We're getting the hell out of here. We're selling this damn thing. We're getting rid of it. But she keeps holding out hope for the man she loves, and she waits. And Tom and Reston come back, and they're all waiting there. He finally gets back, but then the house starts doing other things.
Yeah, the house, even in the outside world, so to speak, as opposed to the version of the house through that particular doorway, that that house comes leaking out into the quote unquote regular house.
Mm-hmm.
And it does so in a pretty fucking violent fashion.
Yeah,
Like
very quickly.
it's bad. Like the house basically, it seems like it's trying to destroy them before they can leave.
Right. It doesn't want them to leave, so it's going to take them.
Yeah.
So, like, there's a scene where one of the kids is like, he won't even come in the house anymore. He's too afraid, so he's like hanging out in a tree in the backyard. But the little girl, is like up in a room, and there's like this chasm opening up between her and like the exit to the room. And so, like, Will and his brother Tom, who are like super close, are like trying to get to her, and Tom, who was like kind of the coward but wouldn't go any further but kind of like held fast at base camp, and like had this weird kind of morbid sense of humor about the whole adventure. He like manages to save little girl, passes him to Nabenson, and then the whole floor opens up and swallows him.
Yeah.
And he's gone.
Yeah,
and that's
he's literally eaten by the house.
He's eaten by the house, and you never see him again.
Yeah.
And then they all depart the house, and they go away. It's like several months they're gone, right?
Oh yeah, at least it's 6 months or more.
6 months or more.
Because Karen goes to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Nevinson says he's going to follow her, but he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to get better because him and Tom are actually twins. They're actually fraternal twins, so they're super super close. So losing his brother wrecked him pretty badly.
Right.
But he keeps it real quiet, and he's just kind of like, acting like, oh, I'm just going over like the tapes and this and that. And he like, puts some weight back on, like starts eating healthy and working out.
And reporters come to interview him and all this other kind of stuff.
Like he's staying with Reston, and Reston's like, I thought he was getting better. It turns out he was planning to go back to the house, and that's why he got in shape. That's why he got himself healthier, was so that he could confront that void, like and I guess try and understand it.
Yeah. And he does. So he goes back in, and actually really smart. He gets a bicycle and builds a trailer onto it. And so he starts going in, and like he's like, just pedaling along, and then all of a sudden the ground starts sloping to the point where he's like, because he actually puts an odometer on it.
Yeah.
And so
he's making hundreds of miles.
He's making like hundreds of miles a day. And he like, after the first day when he makes so far, he's like, shit, I better turn around. So he turns around, and then he's immediately going downhill again. And then he turns around, and he's immediately going down hills again. And he's like, oh, what the hell am I going to do? So he just goes and goes and goes. And, at one point, the house finally like takes his trailer, separates him out. So he only has his pack on his back. And then
he ends up basically in the middle of a void,
and in nothing but a black void, and his batteries are all out. You get occasional like photographs and audio recordings of like his moments. And then one of the coolest scenes in the book is, now he happens to have with him a copy of The House of Leaves.
Yeah.
That he's reading, and it says, there was 709 pages in the book, and I went to the end. I was like, oh shit, there's exactly 709 pages in the book. Even with the blank pages, it's 709 or whatever.
Yeah.
But so it's like there's exactly 709 pages in the book, and in order to preserve his light in the last shots for his photograph, he strikes the last box of matches he has, and he sets the pages on fire so he can read the book at, like, the matches are burning down, he's reading really fast, and then he lights it on the page on fire as he's reading the rest of it, and then like he does that for the entirety of the rest of the book, and then he's cast into blackness.
Yeah, literally ends up floating in the void.
And he's like, I think I'm not even on anything anymore. I think I'm just in nothing. And then he's like, is this what happened to Tom?
Yeah, and he's completely dehydrated and you know, like developing hypothermia. Like he's totally out of it. But he is, as far as we can tell, just floating in nothing.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, Karen has come back to the house because she finds out that he went back in. And when Rustin and her go back to the house, the entrance to the maze is gone. Like, there's just like a coat closet. Like a normal one with like white walls. And,
really like shallow one.
Yeah. And so she's like, what the fuck? And so she stays in the house waiting. And sometimes she apparently hears something from Nevinson that like other people can't hear. It doesn't get picked up by the cameras, but she's responding to something. And at one point she finds in one of the upstairs rooms a bunch of Nevinson's stuff, like some clothes of his and like things that like it was a bunch of the stuff he left behind when he jumped up into the other stairway in the little house when he had to leave all his other stuff behind. And
the tapes.
And the tapes. So she's like watching one of the tapes and like the void opens up behind her. And the thing about Karen is like she is terrified of dark spaces. Like she's not okay with it.
Hyper-claustrophobic.
Yeah, and so it's important to note this when she just like walks right into that blackness to try and find him.
Yeah.
And
she's watching the tapes and watches like the final moments where he like goes into darkness, turns around, realizes the void, the entrance is right behind her. And goes in.
Yeah.
And he's there.
Finds him. And just ends up on the front lawn. She can't even explain it. It happened. Nevinson is pretty fucked up. Like he loses a hand and an eye and like frostbite.
Yeah, he's like near dead, and it takes him a while to recover, but he does.
Yeah.
Recover, and they get married.
Yeah, and things seem pretty much fine for them.
Yeah, they actually kind of have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Right? Versus kind of the unknown.
Provided it's real, or even in our reality.
Or reality or anything. Yeah. Or like maybe they both died in the void and this was their, who knows?
Yeah. And that's the thing is it's like, because the editors repeatedly state that there's no evidence of any of this existing. But then when you kind of take into account like that labyrinth and how it changes distance and time and everything else, it's like, maybe this really happened somewhere else in a different universe. I don't know.
And this book, I mean, it's kind of, and I was talking to you about this earlier, the whole, and obviously we were discussing it at length, but before we got on camera here, but like, the whole book is about madness and obsession. And it's like, that's Johnny's key thing, right? Madness and obsession. That's Zapano's madness and obsession. That's Navison's madness and obsession. Navison manages to escape it because of his wife who loves him.
Yeah.
But the other two don't have anyone.
Yeah.
So they don't escape it.
But they are looking for that, though, both of them.
Yes, they're looking for an exit to the void, the voidness that they feel.
And like I was saying, I think, you know, the author says that while it's a horror novel, it can also be interpreted as a love story.
Mm-hmm.
And to love deeply is to be afraid. It is. Yeah. You know, as someone, you know, hi, I'm a widow, going through grief, who had to face that fear, you know, during my husband's illness. I mean, gosh, she was a parent. It's not something parents dwell on, but there is fear In
Oh, yeah.
in really powerful love, there is fear.
Yeah.
There just is. Like you cannot have one without the other.
No.
And that is something that is echoed all throughout this book.
Yeah.
Is really powerful love is accompanied by honestly a kind of terror. It just is. It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, what if something happens? What if I like, there's all those little things where it's like when another human is that precious to you,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be fear.
Well, and it was like, I think Alan Watts, the philosopher way back in the 60s, said something like, always in the back of your mind, even when things are going well, something way, 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 way down knows at any moment something can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And it is that creeping feeling. And when you love something deeply, that is even more apparent. Like, I'm a parent, and as a parent,
yeah.
and as a parent of 4 kids, like, there is always that sensation whenever your kid leaves the house or does anything.
Yeah.
You don't know. You
Yeah.
don't know. And you hope that everything is fine, but when it's not, it's deeply painful.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, Johnny comes from a broken household. His dad was a car wreck because of...
He was a pilot who got grounded because of a heart condition and was starting training as a truck driver and died in a crash.
Right. Yeah. And then his I mean, if you take it the book at its word, at least parts of it its word, because it's confusing, his mother went mad with grief from the father's loss, right?
Oh no, she just went crazy anyway.
But yeah. But
because his father was still alive. His father was actually who committed her.
Right. But then there's like the other story when, like, no, the father died first and she strangled Johnny and...
No. In both of them, his father dies afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of details to remember in this book.
There is. I swear I'm not being a nitpicky jerk. It's literally just that there's a lot to keep track of.
You've read it multiple times. I just finished it yesterday for the first time. So
yeah, there's a lot.
And I've got like 20 pages of notes, and it just doesn't matter. So, but let's talk a little bit about the structure of the book, like, and how, like, because I noticed pretty quickly that as they're venturing through the house, the structure of the book begins to change.
Yes.
And when the house is small, you get lines like this, right? You just get like 2 lines. Yeah. There's a sentence on each page, right? 172
or when you're entering the
173.
terrifyingly vast spaces, this also happens.
Right, the terrifyingly vast spaces too, right? But then, when everything's kind of stretching out, you get like a whole chunk of text, right?
Yeah.
So, and then of course you get like different fonts and formats. You have like Tom's narrative is almost like Comic Sans. It's like an unserious. It's like a less serious sans serif's font, and Tom is sitting at the stairwell waiting. In like terrified, he talks about, oh, Mr. Monster, don't come and eat me. Like he's making constant jokes, and he's like, Mr. Monster, I'm fat and old. I wouldn't taste very good, and all this other kind of stuff. So he's like constantly cracking jokes.
I don't know how visible this is. This is a good example. So this is when Navidson goes back. We see here, right? We've got this square.
It's like very
and it
tiny
starts
square.
Shrinking,
right?
Because he is in a tunnel.
That's shrinking with him.
Shrinking.
Yeah.
And so it gets smaller and smaller.
And then it says at one point he has to crawl on all fours, and then there's only one long line of text as if you're crawling through the tunnel with him.
And it may sound gimmicky, but I swear it actually works. I like, honestly, I can completely understand why this book doesn't work for everyone, but I think it's worth a shot from anyone willing to like really plunge into
something different.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may not work for, like, for some people. I get it. Like it could be frustrating for some people. It could be annoying for some people. For me, I love it. And it's.
I did have to take a 2-day break at one point because I was like, I'm exhausted by reading this, but also I really want to know what happens with that damn house.
Yeah.
So I think that's what, because the Truant stuff, Johnny Truant's story is not as compelling, but it's so central to the narrative.
Yeah.
But it is like the story of like a guy who is just like kind of wandering through life trying to find meaning and purpose, and here he's found it through the construction of this book, but at the same time he's losing it because of
Yeah,
his obsession
it
with this book.
devours him.
It devours him, and in every sense of the word. I mean, you know, there was like, I wrote one of my notes here was about that. How, where is it here? It's something about like the book is like feeding the story. The book is a child feeding on him. His trauma makes him mad, and it's like the book feeds on it. After all, what do stories want but to live? And how do they live if not told? Have not told? Is this story? If this story becomes famous, like a found footage film, and it lives by destroying the subject, it's a kind of spell, right?
Yeah.
Because I kind of, and as I was telling Athena again before we got on here, it kind of, interestingly, it comes out pretty close in time to the Blair Witch Project, which is not the first found footage film.
No, no.
By any stretch of the imagination. I think it was Cannibal Holocaust, 70s or 80s.
No, so that really early 80s.
Really early 80s. So that was Cannibal Holocaust. That's if you don't know what found footage is, it is like the genre of horror where they find the tapes of the people who didn't make it, right? I think another one is As Above, So Below. I freaking love that one where they go into the catacombs of Paris and there's a gateway to hell and all that kind of stuff. Well, like apparent hell. But like, so, you know, Blair Witch was like this, but the Nabenson record is kind of a found footage until the very end.
Yeah.
And then when Nabenson survives, because in most found footage you don't survive, but that kind of has that kind of quality to it. It's a story that needs to be told. And for Johnny and Zapano, it's a story that needs to be obsessed over, which is why I thought it was really funny when I went to the online internet forums to kind of see how people interacted with this book.
And they get deeply obsessed.
And they get deeply obsessed with it. And it's like, wow, you kind of fell into the very trap the author is talking about.
Yeah.
Like walling yourself off from reality with this tale that you can obsess with. And people had the craziest amount of, like, I mean, you know, there's some people on the Reddit forums that were like 15, 20 pages of post or links to very long obsessive posts, dissecting every detail, looking for like meaning in every letter at the end of the book, because there's a series of letters that the editors add from Johnny's mother in the hospital to him, and apparently some of them indicate that maybe he sent them back, but some people even believe that Johnny doesn't exist and that it's all in his mother's mind, which I think is a little bit of a stretch.
I think that's taking things a little farther than anything indicates. But well, and like I was saying, you were saying found footage, but for me, what it really reminded me of, and it came out when this was really starting to peak, was ARGs, right? Mm-hmm. So
define ARGs
for those of you who are not as internet elderly as me, so ARGs they still exist to some degree, but it's alternate reality games, right? And it's usually essentially a type of interactive metafiction that leads you through different websites and blog posts, et cetera, et cetera.
Myst would be an example of an ARG,
well,
right?
imagine if Myst was multiple pages on the internet that appeared to be actual blog posts from people. So, like, a really good example, so Marble Hornets was a really popular one that was actually based off of, like, the whole Slender Man mythos, which, fun fact, I was actually on that Something Awful thread, the Create Paranormal Images thread. I was browsing that right when the first Slender Man photo was posted. We had no idea it was going to get that big. We did think it was cool. It was like, oh wow, that's really creepy. And then like a few years later, it just blew up.
Yeah, you're dating us, Athena.
Dating me? I'm older than you, buddy.
That's true.
I'm significantly older. But yeah, so Marble Hornets was one, and that was not technically Slender Man, but it was like based off of that mythos. Or another really good one was Diana House. I think some parts of that are still up, which was about like a house that lures people in and then literally eats them. Like, really, really fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're talking multiple websites, multiple blog posts, and like they would make like fake realtor posts, like and this very much has the feel of if an ARG became a book,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. Um,
for sure. I mean, that
but
makes
he
total
started
sense.
it before ARGs were a thing. Like that's
Right.
what's astounding about this
Well, and
is the guy was working on the book for like a decade.
right, and like if you look at like the found footage craze, which really launches from Blair Witch. I mean, you had a couple before, but
Yeah,
Blair
but it
Witch
wasn't
is
like a thing.
it wasn't a thing. It was like, okay, here's a unique here's a unique piece in there. I mean, he was certainly right. Like if you look at the timeline, he had to be like in the final stages of the publication process with the publisher when that film came out.
Yeah,
So there's no way that he was directly influenced by, but that's kind of how culture works. Is you kind of have these trends that kind of pop up, like you get a person who's like a trend starter, but it's like with the light bulb. The light bulb was invented 7 distinct times around the world with people who are not connected to one another directly, but the level of technology had arrived in such a way that people came to
yeah,
these natural kind of
yeah, and
conclusions.
it makes sense like with the internet rising up and like with easy access to like home media, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. Like it makes sense that this book would start happening.
Right, absolutely.
Oh, I just thought of an ARG that I think is still up. Um,
Go
if
play
if you
it.
all wanna, it's just a story. It's metafiction on the internet, but it's a website. Just Google Ted the Caver. And it's
Ted the Caver.
yes, so it's
Okay.
about a guy and like he drags a friend or two into it with him, but they go exploring a cave and things go wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a series of blog posts, and as far as I know, it's actually I think the website is still up. I think whoever wrote that initially just kept it going because it's fun,
Right, right.
But it was one of the very first that really got famous on the internet. It was like Ted the Caver. I'll send you a link later.
That's cool. Cool. I'll check it out. There was two other things I really wanted to talk about. The first was the quote of on page 139 of Cinema Verite. Do you know that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I am, as a visual and media anthropologist, I spent a lot of time looking at different styles of documentary filmmaking and ethnographic films, and Cinema Verite was one of those. There's a number of very famous ones in anthropology, and like Dead Birds and various others, where it's just the whole purpose is just to take video of, quote, the truth, right? And of course, like he actually mentions on page 139 in a footnote, Cinema Verite, and it's like in this approach to filmmaking, and then there's all this commentary on it, and it's just kind of like again playing with this line of the unreliable narrator, and then really very clearly highlighting the critique of Cinema Verite, which is like you're still having to aim that camera, bud.
yeah,
It's still tunnel vision. No
yeah,
matter how wide of a shot you get, you're still missing, all but about 45 degrees of an entire angle of reality.
yeah,
So there's still very much kind of this perception, and he plays a lot with that perception, like whose perception to trust, whose perception not to trust,
yeah.
which leads me to my next point, and it's this, in some ways, feels like a very postmodern text, even though I think he's making fun of postmodernism, because he literally quotes Derrida,
Yeah,
and everyone who has ever read any graduate stuff knows Derrida sucks.
yeah,
He's almost indecipherable.
yeah.
These damn French theorists. So it's kind of like, I kind of think that in some ways he's playing with these ideas.
And quotes Derrida at his most like opaque
Oh, yeah.
too.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
just
several
like, oh,
times.
that's useless.
Yeah, and I said like, but there's also like this element of like the gravity of the house can shift suddenly as it does on Navenson and others several times. But then like you're having to turn the book around, and so you're having to shift your perspective of the book, and it did have like a very postmodernist feel. But I also feel like it's postmodernist. And by the way, if you don't know what postmodernism, it's just kind of the rejection of truth and grand theory. So like, for example, like a postmodernist would reject grand theories like Marxism or modernism or various other kind of movements or themes, or they would reject genres because they would say genre is a cultural construct of the people of that particular given era and other given
Which is
eras.
funny because postmodernism has its movements.
Right.
I mean, Dada,
right.
of course,
right.
probably being the most
Dada,
famous
yeah,
one.
of course.
Yeah.
Right.
And feel free to look up Dada. You'll find some wonderful art.
Yeah, and also there's that, it's on TikTok or Instagram, 5-minute crafts. It's Dada Start. Like, it's like this really strange, like they take these really, it's like there was like one with a toilet and it was like, they transformed it into like this happy, like toilet, like eating your poop or something like that. But it was
Why?
really...
Because
why not? Yeah, so, but postmodernism is the rejection of grand forms, like, this is just a little bug personally. When you hear people talk about postmodernist Marxist, it's like, dude, those are two contradicting.
Go well together.
No, because Marxism is a grand idea and postmodernism is the rejection of forms and grand ideas. Yeah. And just the idea that we can never really know the truth. And you could go that way with this book. You could absolutely go that way.
But maybe postmodern is good because you know what it reminds me of more than anything else in tone is David Lynch's work.
Oh yeah,
which
it does feel Lynchian.
People get focused on the weirdness of Lynch's work, but what makes Lynch's work really good, and I think what makes this book good, is there's a sincerity to it, and there is actually a care for humanity at the heart of it.
Yeah.
Like, this is a book, like I said, I'm coming at this through the lens of grief. I mean, that's just my life right now. You know, for context, we're not going to get into anything weird. Don't worry, but I lost my husband in October. And as someone coming at kind of the entire world through that lens, there is actually a kindness in this book, and there's a care for the people in it.
Yeah.
And that is very much what makes Lynch's work so remarkable. It's like, yeah, you have all the bizarre, you know...
But there's no cynicism.
No, there's no cynicism.
There's no cynicism.
There's no cynicism in his work, and there's no cynicism in this. There really is.
No.
Like,
I didn't get that.
Sometimes there's like a little silliness, like, haha, okay, this is kind of ridiculous, and I'm aware of that. But like, there's no cruelty to it. There's no cynicism. And I think, postmodern probably does work. Right.
And I think that, as social theory even moved out of postmodernism, because obviously there's postmodernist art, postmodernist literature, postmodernist music, postmodernist social theory, all kinds of stuff, right? And so there's this whole movement, and there was a counter move in the 80s and 90s that said, the problem with postmodernism is it's too cynical.
Yeah.
Because, like, at the end of the day...
And it could become cruel.
And it could become cruel or nihilistic. Like, if you truly believe we can never know anything, then we believe in nothing, Lebowski, right? Like, it's kind of like this grand joke. Well, why do anything at all?
Yeah, and why are you even making this art then?
And the discipline of anthropology had to confront this. And in the 80s and 90s, like, I think it's Sherry Ortner, who's kind of a famous theorist in anthropology, she confronted this question of postmodernism. Well, if you can never understand someone's other perspective from another culture, then what's the point of doing anything at all?
Yeah, it's like go get another job then, I guess.
The choice is to do nothing, or the choice is to try.
Yeah.
To try and understand this human experience, to try and understand, because you described this to me, and that was what was interesting, is you described it as existentialist horror, right?
Yeah.
When we were talking about it at the party and this whole idea of doing this podcast came up, you described it as that, and I was like, existentialist horror, like the question of the nature of being human. And it's like, I really do think he's like, look, shit is not always in your power. The world and reality shifts and changes on you. Life pulls the rug out from under you. But you know what? There are people who give a shit.
Yeah.
And even Lude, all the way to his end, kept trying to help his friend.
He did.
And
for all that he was a fucked up individual.
For all that he was a fucked up, broken individual.
He cared.
He did. And there was even Thumper in the end cares about Johnny. She shows up at the end and he goes to say goodbye to her, and she actually cares about him and gives him a big hug and, says, please take care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so despite the fact that there's so much twisting and turning, literally in some cases, with these hallways and passages, and they take this downward spiral, which Johnny's going through a mental downward spiral as they're encountering this apparently infinite spiral staircase that can shift and change size and shape. And even as Navenson is like lost in the void by himself, it is love that brings him back.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's our human connections that matter most in the unknown and the uncertain. And that was kind of what I took away, really, from the larger picture of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a kindness at the heart of it. And there really is. There is, again, most of the fear comes from people's care for each other.
Right.
Like, because if you didn't care about someone, you wouldn't give a shit about them going into that block hallway. You'd be like, okay, bye. See you in a week or whatever.
Right. And
there would be no fear.
Right. And, there was nothing he could do about Tom. And that broke him up. And that's how it is. Sometimes the void swallows someone you love and there's nothing you can do. But I think...
And you can try and understand it, but you never will.
Right. And I think in the end, I just think that the end where Karen braces her fears, crosses into the void, and rescues her husband, I think that it was just a powerful moment, for sure.
Yeah. Like, neither one comes out unscathed, per se. Like, she's changed, although seems like in some ways for the better. He's desperately physically scarred, but they're alive and they're together.
Yeah, so say we all. More nerd references. Any final thoughts?
Not really, except, like, honestly, this was probably a very meandering discussion. I swear it's a meandering book. Yeah. There's nothing you can really do about that. But I will say, if you are curious, give it a shot. Really do. It may not work for you, because, again, it's a bit of a complicated read, but...
Not all art is for everybody.
Exactly. Like, it just may not work for you. But I would say give it a try. Yeah. Honestly, give it a try. Completely worth it if it works for you.
And we did not catch even close to all the plot points.
God, no.
There's so many other things going on.
Yeah,
and so many other characters. I mean, like, it's 700 pages. We'd be talking for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
So, we gave you like a 50-minute summary, which is the best you can do with a book like this. Because there's so many different elements to it and pieces. But we are going to continue on. Next time, we're going to cover the Clive Barker epic horror novel, Imagica, which is, I think both of us, it's one of our favorites. I think I read it in 2017, so I'm definitely due for a reread.
Yeah, I haven't reread it in a while, but I've read that one quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it is very strange and unusual, and I believe it's the first, if not one of the first, epic horror novels, which if you think of terms of epic fantasy, you're talking about a big, sprawling, long book with a great journey. It's a beast. I think it's like 1,100 pages or something like that.
It's a very long book. That was during... Bless him, and I love that his books are still thoroughly readable, but man, Clive Barker, when he gets going...
That's true.
It's like, can I make this book bigger somehow?
Yeah. But it's like Stephen King. If you love his style, you love his storytelling, you just can't get enough of him. So that's what we'll be covering next time. We'll set up a schedule shortly. Thanks for joining us for House of Leaves. Okay.
This is a book that it's hard to talk about without sounding like you're rambling.